check out the streaming schedule on Jaguar Gator 9 for the month of August. We've got 14 more preseason games coming up, plus a few Q&A streams, and of course, live NFL trivia every Wednesday night on Twitch and simulcast on YouTube. Make sure you subscribe so you don't miss any of the action. And now, on with our feature presentation. I don't think it's an exaggeration to say that the 1979 season for the Detroit Lions was one of the worst in franchise history. Obviously, it wasn't the worst, seeing as they had a season where they literally did not win a single game. But everything that could have gone wrong for the Lions in 1979 did, with the only saving grace being that they were so bad that they got the number 1 pick, leading to them eventually drafting running back Billy Sims. You kinda just had a feeling that this was going to be an awful year for them when before the regular season even started, they lost their starting quarterback, Gary Danielson, for the whole year with a knee injury, putting them behind the 8 ball before week 1. And man, everything about this season once it actually kicked off was ugly with a capital U. They ended the season with the worst offense in football, scoring just 219 points all year, or 13.7 points per game. They had the 3rd worst defense in the NFC, allowing 365 points, or just under 23 points per game, which was a lot back then. This meant that they were outscored, on average, by 2 possessions per game, and their point differential of minus 146 was by a fairly comfortable margin the worst in the NFL. And here's a graph showing that. It really was in another stratosphere of terribleness. And when the season ended, the Lions finished it with the worst record in football, going just 2-14. Oddly enough, I've talked about one of those 14 losses before in a previous video of mine, when I talked about their embarrassing loss in Week 2 to Washington, which you can learn more about by clicking the card in the upper right corner. However, this 2-14 record doesn't tell the full story of just how bad the Lions were. Aside from the fact that this was the first time since 1948, more than 3 decades before, that they finished a season with double-digit losses, and was the first time since the Korean War that they were legitimately horrendous, the 1979 Lions were so bad that they had an ability to lose games that they didn't even play in. There are certain things that should be binary options, where only one of 2 things can happen. If you flip a coin, it will either land on heads, or it will land on tails. However, imagine if a 3rd option happened, where the coin somehow landed on its side. You don't know how it happened, but that's just how bizarre it was. That's how your life was going. Well, that's what happened with the 1979 Lions, because of course it did. During a Monday Night Football game late in the season in the AFC East, between the New England Patriots and the Miami Dolphins, in a game that meant nothing to the Lions whatsoever in terms of their draft pick status or their playoff picture, somehow, the team that really lost the game was not the New England Patriots, and it was not the Miami Dolphins, but rather, it was the Detroit Lions, hundreds of miles away, in an absolutely bizarre story that we're going to take a deep dive into today. Because this is the story behind the absolutely insane and chaotic drama of the 1979 Detroit Lions, and what might just be one of the stupidest and craziest controversies in Monday Night Football history. Before I talk about the actual drama in question, we need some context to understand why the Lions were so bad in the first place, because it will help us to understand the comments that were made that eventually led to all hell breaking loose. There were many reasons why the Lions finished the season with a 2-14 record. You don't become the worst team in football thanks to just one individual person. However, one of the main reasons was the play of their quarterback, which was this man right here, Jeff Komlo. Now look, Komlo was never supposed to start, and I'm not even sure how many people had expectations for him. He was a 9th-round rookie out of Delaware, and he was expected to just be competing for a roster spot. Obviously, That all changed when Gary Danielson got hurt, and he was elevated to the backup. And it changed even more when the number 2 quarterback, Joe Reed, had to get pulled from the game in Week 1 against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers due to stomach problems. All of a sudden, Komlo went from the number 3 guy and a guy just competing to make the team to the number 1 guy. Rookies did not start under center back then, at least not right away, and especially not 9th round picks. That was almost unheard of. But still, the Lions were optimistic that Komlo could be the guy, and Komlo was optimistic as well. Said Komlo, "I guess I'm supposed to tell you that I'm not ready, and that I need more time. But I feel ready, and I can do it. I know I can." Coming back on the plane last week after the Buccaneers game in Week 1, I told the team that. I told them, "Hey, get behind me. I need your help, but I'll do the job. Believe it." And Don Kremer, the public relations man for the Lions, said on Komlo, "We had him ranked among the top 5 quarterbacks in the country. We tried like the devil to make a deal to get him as a 4th round pick. When he was still around in the 9th round, we felt like we really lucked into something. Head coach Monty Clark loves his arm and his leadership, but mostly his intelligence. I'm going to heavily doubt that, seeing as the Lions had a 5th round pick and an 8th round pick, and they didn't take Komlo there. So why did you try to trade up to get him in the 4th round? And then, when you had a chance to take him in the rounds after that, you didn't. That doesn't seem to make a whole lot of sense. He was worthy of a 4th round pick where you had to trade up, but not a 5th rounder or an 8th rounder? What's the logic behind that?" Anyways, poor logic and terrible and highly questionable PR spin aside, the Lions were hoping that Komlo could do the job, partly because they believed in him, and partly because based on their injury luck, he was basically the only man left at this point. And to be fair to Jeff Komlo, he was a really good quarterback in 1979, if you were playing on the opposing team. If we're judging him by how well he did as the Lions quarterback, yeah, the results are not pretty at all. In the 14 games that he started, the Lions finished with a 2-12 record, and I can't even say that the 2 wins themselves were because of him, seeing as one of those games, a 20-0 victory over the Bears, featured him throwing 3 interceptions. I always joke on this channel when talking about passer rating that you'd be better off just spiking the ball into the ground on every single play. The passer rating for a quarterback that does not complete a single pass and does not throw an interception, essentially the equivalent of spiking the ball into the ground on every single play, is 39.6. In Komlo's 14 starts, his passer rating was worse than that in 5 of them. Seriously, there was a greater than 1 in 3 chance that Komlo would be under center, and he seriously could have been better off spiking the ball into the ground on every single play from a passer rating standpoint. In one of those games, a 28-10 loss to the Miami Dolphins, he completed 31% of his passes, going 5 for 16 with 59 yards, no touchdowns, 2 interceptions, 3 sacks for 33 yards, meaning that he had just 26 net passing yards and a passer rating of 3.9. And if you think a 3.9 passer rating is bad, what if I told you that this wasn't even his worst passer rating of the season? Because in a separate game against the New England Patriots, he went 2 for 8 with 18 yards, no touchdowns, 1 interception, and a passer rating of 0.0. I don't even know what to say to that. When your passer rating is 0 on the dot, just go home. Just go home at that point. Oddly enough, the Dolphins and Patriots, as in the 2 teams that Komlo had his lowest passer ratings against, will play a very important part in our story in just a bit. On the season, Komlo completed just 49.7% of his passes, which ranked 26th in the NFL out of 28 qualified quarterbacks, only ahead of New England Patriots quarterback Steve Grogan and Tampa Bay Buccaneers quarterback Doug Williams. The league-wide average in 1979 was over 54%, and here was Komlo, well below that mark. There were 18 quarterbacks, including Komlo, to start at least 14 games in 1979, so over 85% of the season. Of those quarterbacks, Komlo had the fewest touchdown passes by a comfortable margin, and had the fewest passing yards also by a comfortable margin. He threw 23 interceptions, which was one of the worst totals in the league, and he threw a pick on a whopping 6.3% of his passes. The only qualified quarterback to have a worse percentage of passes ending with an interception was Richard Todd of the New York Jets, who did this on 6.6% of his passes. He actually ended the season with 11 touchdowns and 23 interceptions. That's a touchdown to interception ratio worse than 1-2. So not only did he throw a boatload of picks, but he threw very few touchdowns in the process. Want some even more numbers to show just how bad Komlo was with the Lions in 1979? His 23 interceptions was the worst total in franchise history, and still is to this day. And while it was tied with Bobby Lane's total of 23 interceptions from the 1951 season, Lane at least has an excuse, seeing as that was very commonplace to throw a boatload of picks back in the 1950s. He threw 26 touchdowns, so he had a positive touchdown to interception ratio. He was winning games for the Lions that year, and he was widely considered to be one of the best quarterbacks in the league, even making it to the Pro Bowl that season by leading the league in both passing yards and passing touchdowns. You can throw a lot of picks if you're throwing a lot of touchdowns and for a lot of yards. Komlo doesn't have that excuse. Not at all. In fact, here's a look at every starting quarterback in Lions history in the Super Bowl era to start at least 2 games in a season, so as not to include players who barely played, and the number of interceptions that they threw in a season. This is from 1966 to 1979, which is when Komlo played. Komlo's 23 interceptions was almost unheard of, as if he had never played the quarterback position before. The general trend seemed to be that as the years went on, Lions quarterbacks got smarter and took better care of the football. And then, here comes Jeff Komlo and his 23 interceptions, many of which were nowhere near his intended target, unless his intended target was the nearest defender, and he was trying to play for the other team. He was that bad. And I want to give some added perspective on just how bad Jeff Komlo was during this 1979 season, because trust me, this will play an important part in our story in just a bit. Because if you think he played like a bum, oh man, do I have news for you. When you take Komlo's 23 interceptions and his 11 touchdowns, it means he had a touchdown minus interception stat of minus 12, or 12 more picks than touchdowns. Obviously, you want to be in the positives. The higher the number, the better. Well, here's a look at every single player from the 1979 season to throw either at least 1 touchdown or at least 1 interception. In total, there were 68 players to do this. You've got a ton of guys bunched up in the middle simply because of trick plays and whatnot, so they didn't throw a whole lot of passes, or guys that just came into the game in mop-up duty. But this gives you a pretty good idea at both extremes of who the best and worst quarterbacks were during the 1979 season. And look at Komlo's total of minus 12. Look at how that thing just stands out for how much it stinks. A negative total wasn't exactly the worst thing in the world. Terry Bradshaw on the Pittsburgh Steelers was one of the best quarterbacks in football in 1979. He led the Steelers to the Super Bowl, and he was only at +1 in this stat. As a side note, to learn more about Bradshaw's 1979 season, click the card in the upper right corner. But minus 12, as in what Jeff Komlo did, was the worst total in the league, and almost seemed unfathomable. So I'm not sure I'm exactly saying anything controversial when I say that Jeff Komlo was really, really bad in 1979. He was near the bottom of the league, or at the bottom of the league, in every important metric. And if you ask people who the worst quarterback in football was in 1979, odds are they would say Komlo, and they wouldn't even think twice about it. He was that bad. And by this point in our story where this incident takes place, the Lions were mathematically eliminated from the playoffs. They had nothing to play for but pride. And if you were watching them willingly on a weekly basis, or spending money to go to the Silverdome and watch this inept team try and play football, then God bless you, because you may be entitled to financial compensation. The Lions were not good at playing football, and Jeff Komlo was not good at playing football. But you know who was good at playing football? These two teams right here. It's November 29th, 1979. It's week 14 of the season. And as we're approaching the end of the year, we've got a monumental battle on our hands in the AFC East on a special Thursday night edition of Monday Night Football on ABC between the New England Patriots and the Miami Dolphins down at the Orange Bowl. Aside from the fact that this was a big game, simply because it was on national TV, back when that really meant something, this game had massive implications on the entire playoff picture. Through 13 weeks, both the Dolphins and the Patriots sat at 8-5, tied atop the AFC East. The stakes are simple. Win this game, and you jump to sole possession of first place with 2 games to go. Lose this one, especially since the Houston Oilers are 10-3, and the Denver Broncos are 9-4, and they currently occupy the 2 wildcard spots, and your playoff hopes are hanging on by a thread, sitting back in the division lead, and sitting 1.5 games back of the final wildcard spot. This was one of the biggest regular season games of the year, and for good reason. If you cared about football, you were watching this game. You had your TV tuned on to ABC, and you were viewing this Patriots-Dolphins battle. This was appointment television. And if you were at a bar, you can bet that every single TV at the bar had this game on, available for your viewing pleasure. And sure enough, one of those bars was Maddo's, a bar under 30 miles outside of Detroit in the town of Rochester, Michigan. The bar no longer exists today. Today, the place is occupied by a strip mall and is right next to a McDonald's, because of course it is. But it was here, much like every other bar in the country, where this game was being shown. And it was here, much like the Orange Bowl, where some action would happen that would rock the NFL. Now, as for what happened at the Orange Bowl, the game itself, the Dolphins did everything that they had to do, essentially moving one step closer to their second straight playoff appearance and their first AFC East title since 1974, as they defeated their division rival, the New England Patriots, by a final score of 39-24, in a game that wasn't even that close, seeing as the Dolphins led it 39-17 late in the fourth quarter before a garbage time touchdown. The whole country watched a Miami demolition in which the team scored 26 consecutive points to truly put the game out of reach in the second half. It always helps when your defense forces a whopping 6 turnovers, sacks Steve Grogan 4 times to push the offense backward, recovers all 4 fumbles that the Patriots put on the ground, and has an incredible 170 yards rushing and 3 rushing touchdowns on over 4.1 yards per carry, compared to just 93 yards on 26 carries, or just 3.5 yards per carry for the Patriots. All in all, it was another great day at the office for Don Shula's ball club, as they won for the 3rd time in the last 4 weeks. Oddly enough, I talked about another Monday Night Football game involving the Miami Dolphins during that 1979 season in the month of November nonetheless, this one being against the Houston Oilers. So if you want to learn more about that, you can do so by clicking the card in the upper right corner. But much like a ton of football fans, some players on the Detroit Lions decided to gather at Maddo's, that suburban bar, to watch the game unfold. And I just want to stress this again. This game meant absolutely nothing to the Detroit Lions. nothing that happened in this game could impact their playoff picture, which, let's be honest, was decided by the time September ended. When Billy Joe Armstrong woke up after September ended, the Lions were pretty much already eliminated. This game meant nothing in terms of their draft status. It's not as though they would have gotten a better or a worse draft pick depending on the outcome of this game. By all accounts, no one on planet Earth should have been paying attention to the Lions during this game. Nothing with the Detroit Lions, a team in a completely different conference that stunk, for whom this game meant nothing, should have mattered on this Thursday night. And yet, the 1979 Lions were so bad that they found a way. Leave it to the Lions to lose a game that they should have had no involvement in. And the culprit in all of this? Much like a lot of their actual losses on the field, it was none other than this man right here, their starting quarterback, Jeff Komlo. Komlo was at this bar, along with his teammate, Keith Dorney. Unlike Komlo, Dorney was actually pretty good. He was a rookie drafted out of Penn State by the Lions in the first round of that 1979 NFL draft, and he would wind up playing 9 seasons with the Lions, starting 110 games for the team on the offensive line, and even making it to the Pro Bowl a few years down the road during that strike-shortened 1982 season, where the Lions also made it into the playoffs. However, both Komlo and Dorney, aside from being rookie teammates, were roommates. That's right. The two men shared an apartment with each other, and they worked together. So let's just say that they spent a lot of time together and were awfully close. And sometimes, when you spend too much time with someone and times are tough, especially in the midst of a horrible season, and you add alcohol into the mix, let's just say that stuff happens. We don't know what play it was exactly during the Patriots-Dolphins game, but at some point during the second half of the contest, one of the quarterbacks, whether it was Bob Greasy on the Miami Dolphins or Steve Brogan on the New England Patriots, made an error, whether it was an interception or a missed throw or a sack. Either way, with the two men watching the game together at the bar, Dorney saw the quarterback screw up and said to Komlo, "He's playing like a bum, just like you." And at that point, oh man, all hell broke loose. I guess you could say that it was the most fight that the Lions showed all season, but let's just say that Komlo did not take too kindly to Dorney's insult, especially since he had some alcohol in his system. Remember all the stats about Komlo as well. I think a lot of people would say that he was playing like a bum. As one eyewitness said on what happened next, Komlo got really mad and commenced to throw beer mugs. I saw him stand up, and he pumped once. He faked it first, and then he threw it and hit Dorney. I saw him draw back again and let one fly. I put my head down, and the other one glanced off Dorney and struck me in the back of the head. A few quick things before going any further. Number one, I love how Komlo had not one, but 2 beer mugs with him that were available for throwing. Number 2, the fact that Komlo was aiming at Dorney both times, and the first one hit the target, while the second one did not hit the target, and instead hit someone else, meant that his completion percentage throwing beer mugs was 50%, or somehow higher than his completion percentage throwing footballs during the 1979 season. It was that kind of year for him. Anyways, the eyewitness who got hit in the back of the head elaborated further on the incident, saying, "As far as what started it right from the start, I really don't know, but some beer was thrown in a person's face. It came right in front of my face and almost hit a couple of my friends who were sitting with me. We all ducked. Then, we knew it was coming again, because I was sitting at an angle where I could see it. I had my face shielded, but I still wanted to see, to make sure it wasn't coming my way. There was no real fighting that took place before that, but as fathering said, the eyewitness, they had been arguing at the table. A lot of swearing and a lot of, remarks made about each other and stuff like that. Fotheringham was sure that the men were drunk, and if it wasn't for another Lion teammate who stepped in when Dorney and Komlo tried to punch each other, with Dorney apparently getting a few good punches at him, the situation could have been a heck of a lot worse for those two men involved. So just to recap where we are right now in this crazy story, Dorney insults Komlo during the game, saying that he was a bum. Again, a game which the Lions are not playing in. Komlo responds by throwing not one, but two beer mugs, the first of which hit Dorney in the face, leading to the two men fighting each other, and leading to Dorney getting a black eye, and the second of which hit an innocent bystander. And this wasn't just a graze to the head. This was somewhat significant damage, to the point where Fotheringham suffered some cuts in the back of his head and threatened a lawsuit. As Fotheringham said, "I don't know how many stitches it took. I can't see it. It was quite deep. My doctor said it was down to the bone. He said it's a jagged cut." Hysterically, the Lions tried to get him to settle and not bring forward a suit by offering him 2 free season tickets to all the games in 1980, which probably had negative value, seeing as none of the games sold out, the team stunk, and why on earth would I want to cheer on the same guy that left me badly injured? It's like if Elon Musk were to punch me at a bar. I threaten to sue, and Musk offers me a free 6 months of Twitter Blue in exchange for me dropping the lawsuit, or X Blue, or whatever the heck it's called right now. That is the worst trade deal in the history of trade deals. Now, from every account, I couldn't find whether the lawsuit went forward or not. Fotheringham said that he was going to sue. Komlo's lawyer said that Fotheringham had yet to prove that he was actually injured since he didn't provide any medical bills. And while nothing immediate happened because, as Terry Givens, who was Fotheringham's attorney, said on this, there were a lot of people there, and it's going to take some time to find out just who was there, which is important for witnesses. We don't know if something happened down the road. I dug high and low and couldn't find anything about how this played out. So if anyone has any information about that, or any resources to look further into the matter, please direct me to them, because I genuinely don't know. Everything past 1979 on this is non-existent. However, we know for a fact that Komlo got punished by the Lions for his involvement in this, as did Dorney. It's funny, because the Lions initially tried to cover up Dorney's black eye by saying he got it in a car accident. Which, look, I'm not saying you can't get a black eye in a car accident. It happens. But to walk away from a car accident with nothing but a black eye is highly suspicious. It's like if I say I'm going to play a game of table tennis and I come back with a broken ankle, and nothing but a broken ankle. Is it plausible? I mean, I guess there are some scenarios where you can break your ankle playing ping pong. Is it highly suspicious that I only broke my ankle? Oh, you bet. Obviously, they were unsuccessful at that cover-up, just like they were unsuccessful at just about everything that they did in 1979. And eventually, the truth came out, with both Komlo and Dorney getting fined $1,000. As head coach Monty Clark said, both players were remorseful, and they shook hands in my office. I just as soon put the whole incident in the past and get on with preparing for the Miami Dolphins. I mean, it's tough to put an incident like that in the past when there is an impending lawsuit on the horizon, since there was a third party involved that had no ties with the Lions whatsoever. It's not really your call to put the incident in the past, but that's neither here nor there, I guess. Leading up to the Miami game, though, Komlo said, "The hardest thing is keeping your confidence, keeping your head up, and not letting losing so many games get you down." He had first-hand experience with that, I can tell you that much. Oh, and for what it's worth, Komlo actually stayed on the Lions after this somehow. I don't know how, but he did. He ended up playing the 1980 season and the 1981 season with the Lions, actually starting a few games for the team in 1981, and eventually found himself on the Tampa Bay Buccaneers in 1983, because some other team wanted him after all of this. I'm not sure why. He ended his career with 12 touchdowns and 28 interceptions, or 29 interceptions if you count the beer mug that hit the bystander. The entire 1979 season for the Lions was an absolute disaster in every capacity, and that's putting it lightly. The offense was a mess. The defense was a mess. Everything was a mess. And perhaps no incident better exhibited this mess than what happened at Meadows during the Monday Night Football game between the Miami Dolphins and the New England Patriots. The Detroit Lions did not play a single Monday Night Football game that season. They were not good enough to even sniff ABC and national television, as outside of their annual Thanksgiving game, which they actually won, the TV networks wanted nothing to do with Detroit, and understandably so. The Lions, for the purposes of Monday Night Football, should have been completely irrelevant in 1979. And yet, somehow, they were not, as they turned out to be the biggest losers of a game that they were not even involved in. Because on this day in 1979, the Lions, and especially rookie quarterback Jeff Komlo, really put the rowdy in all my rowdy friends. Get your official Jaguar Gear 9 merchandise by going to jj9shop.com, and be sure to like and subscribe, as it really helps the channel out a lot. Join me every Wednesday night where we'll play NFL Trivia for cash prizes at 9 p.m. Eastern over on Twitch. To learn more about the history of college football, subscribe to Jaguar Gator 8. To learn more about the history of Major League Baseball, subscribe to Jaguar Gator 7. Also, special thanks to all of our Patreon supporters for helping out the channel. Your support is greatly appreciated. See how you can become a patron and request future video topics in the description below.